Peter Komendowski, and welcome to Surviving Bad, where we explore stories of survival, hope, and inspiration. Today we're talking about the Prescription Abuse Leadership Initiative and the work that's being done to build coalitions throughout the U.S. and Iowa to take on one of America's most prolific killers, opioids. It takes a lot of cooperation and passionate leaders to make headway under the daunting conditions of the opioid epidemic. And one of these leaders, Mark O'Brien, is here today to share his story. Mark, welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what brings you here today.
Peter, thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be on this show, and thank you for all the work that you do to highlight these important issues. As Peter said, I'm Mark O'Brien with the RX Abuse Leadership Initiative. Rally is a national alliance of local, state, and national partners who come together around one shared purpose. We're focused on addressing the opioid crisis. Our members range from law enforcement groups to public health, business, addiction, prevention and treatment groups, mental health organizations, healthcare, pharmaceutical, and provider associations, veterans groups. You name it, we think there's a place at the table to be a part of the solution. We've been working to turn the tide on the opioid crisis for several years, and you know, there have been some ups and downs. We've made some progress, and we've seen some setbacks in this country. We do this by sorry, go ahead, Peter.
What makes it so daunting? I mean, you've talked about setbacks, and you know, we've talked about the numbers. They're not getting better in terms of fatality, and so we know it takes a village. You know, it takes a lot of players, but it's been frustrating for people to work hard and not see a lot of traction. From your perspective, what do you see are some of those issues?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting question, and I think what makes this such a daunting issue is that since 1999, we've lost 1 million people to drug and alcohol overdose. And it's easy to get lost in the data. It's hard to imagine 1 million people. But what I always try to remember is that every single one of those individuals represents a nearly empty seat at somebody's dinner table. They leave behind ripples and a community who misses them, who wishes they were still there, loved ones who are grieving. And that to me is what really drives this work. And the other side of that question is, so what's happening? Why isn't this getting better? And you know, I think what we've seen is that there have been phases of this opioid crisis. It started out in the early part of the 2000s. It was really largely driven by overprescribing and sort of dissemination in our communities around prescription opioids. We did a pretty good job starting to get that under control around 2009, 2010. Doctors were learning to be a little bit more conservative in the way they were prescribing these medications. But unfortunately, we saw that heroin started coming into our community in larger quantities at the same time that people who were used to using prescription opioids and maybe didn't all realize that they had developed an addiction were all of a sudden left without these medications because of changes we were making around prescribing, and they turned to heroin. About 3-4 years ago, I really was feeling very hopeful that we were starting to turn a corner. We saw some overdose numbers that were starting to come down a little bit. And then the COVID pandemic hit and seemed to, you know, throw a wrench in a lot of the progress that was being made at the same time that illicit fentanyl began to really flood our communities. And we're seeing it not only being sold, you know, as fentanyl or as part of heroin, but showing up in counterfeit medications in a lot of places. So I really think of us as being in a third phase of this crisis that's going to require some new responses.
You know, when you talk about 1 million people to an Iowan, you're talking about 30%, 28 to 30% of the population of the entire state. I mean, that's 1 out of every 3 people disappearing in a heartbeat. And, you know, there's a phrase in the past that was often used called the silent majority. And I've heard people say that there are upwards of 10 or even 20 million people addicted to opioids, fentanyl, heroin in America. A huge number. Is this something that you're seeing? Is this a real number out there?
Well, you know, I think the interesting thing is you mentioned a state like Iowa with 3 million people and actually a pretty good amount of land. So, you know, a rural state with not a ton of population density. But one of the things we've seen is this crisis really knows no boundaries. I think there have been periods in our history when we thought of drug addiction, overdoses, substance use as a largely urban or suburban problem. But we're seeing this in all parts of our country now. And so states like Iowa are not immune. And the numbers are, as you said, just vast. And I think you also mentioned, that speaking of a silent majority, oh,
That's okay. This is what Zoom brings us. The whole family participates.
That's right. This is a disease that we don't want to talk about. There's so much stigma around substance use, and people don't want to reach out for the help when this is in their family. They don't want to talk about it when it does end in an overdose or when somebody recovers. Sometimes we just sweep that period of their life under the rug. And I think one of the big challenges is that we have this silence around this issue. I think it's starting to change. When you have 10 million people who are struggling with something, it starts to get harder and harder to ignore. And so we are talking about it more. And I think that's part of the progress we're making.
Those are all great points. Now we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to dig in a little deeper as to what Mark and Rally are doing to curb this epidemic. See y'all after the break. You don't want to miss this.
The black truck? Hey, Christina from accounting.
Yeah, hi.
Hey, I used to date a girl named Christina.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and then she dumped me for my best friend. You want to see some photos of them that I took?
I don't.
I thought we talked about this, buddy.
Buzz and overshared again?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna call a car.
That's a smart idea.
So yeah, I know, that's why I did it.
Hey, you're gonna get back to the top of the mountain.
Does that mean I'm gonna get back with Christina?
No.
Oh.
No.
Every second, 127 new devices connect to the internet. You can feel it happening, our digital world expanding with every breath. We're entering a whole new era of connectivity, and MediaCom will be ready to power it with one of the nation's first 10G platforms. We'll be bringing you more speed, more capacity, more security, and the power to do more than you ever dreamed possible.
Not all internet is priced this good. Switch to Extreme and go super fast for as low as $19.99 a month for a year. Oh yeah, hook up your home with powerful Wi-Fi, 99.99% reliability, and speeds that are FCC proven to be faster than advertised. Not all internet is priced this good. Switch today and get speeds starting at 100 meg for as low as $19.99 a month for a year. Call 844-EXTREME2 for details.
Welcome back to Surviving Bad. We're talking with Mark O'Brien from the Prescription Abuse Leadership Initiative about the warning signs of substance use disorder and what can be done to reduce the risk of misuse and addiction. Mark, tell us about Rally and what you guys are doing. What's happening on the ground?
Yeah, Peter. So we've been working, as I said, for several years to turn the tide on the opioid crisis. Now, Rally convenes partners to exchange best practices and provide resources that help prevent misuse of prescription medicines. We focus primarily on educating the public about preventing opioid misuse in the first place, spotting warning signs if you think there might be a problem, and talking to a loved one when you think they might need help. Rally connects committed partner organizations who can provide resources and support to each other. And we have two primary educational activities that we really focus on in that engagement.
All right, let's hear about them. What are the two?
All right. So, yeah, as I said, we have two big areas. How can you spot the warning signs of addiction if you're concerned about a teen or young adult, especially? And how do we prevent unused prescription medications from being misused or otherwise putting people at risk for developing an opioid crisis?
Let's talk about teens. Let's talk about teens a little bit and some of the signs for parents, because I think that the access part might segue very well into that.
Yeah, absolutely. So in that first category around how do we spot the warning signs, we've launched the Rally Cares trailer in partnership with Code 3, which is a nonprofit of ex-law enforcement officers who have a goal of improving relationships between law enforcement and the communities they serve. The Rally Cares trailer is a simulation of a teenager or young adult's bedroom that these former law enforcement officers use to educate parents and other concerned adults about the signs of addiction and what they can do if they're worried about a young person in their family. So the in-person tour, which literally is on like a tractor trailer, looks at signs you might find in a closet, bathroom, around the bed, or on the desk or floor in this young person's room. We've taken the trailer all over the country, but unfortunately with COVID, we haven't been able to get the trailer on the road over the last couple of years. So what we did is we've been doing live webinar tours of the trailer, pardon me. And we also created a really cool virtual self-guided tour that you can take at rallyusa.org. So it's RALIUSA.org. You just scroll right down, you can't miss it. And I really highly encourage you to check it out, whether you have a young person in your home, or you're in another role where you have influence over the lives of young people or the parents and other caregivers who are looking out for them. So yeah, just scroll down and check out the trailer, and hopefully we'll have it back on the road in not too long, as we're continuing to kind of figure out our way through this COVID pandemic.
So from a teenager's point of view, you're talking about a parent maybe invading their space a little bit for the sake of being vigilant about what the kid might be engaged in.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I'm a parent of young children. My kids are 11, 8, and 6. And with the 11-year-old and actually all three of them, we do talk about these things yet, but they're not quite to the age where I'm super concerned, And I can understand that this can be uncomfortable. This invasion of privacy, I think, is something that parents can be very uncomfortable with. And what I've heard the folks from Code 3 say is that we're talking about a life and death issue. And in your home, the amount of privacy is limited. We're talking about signs that can be relatively apparent once you know what you're looking for. And the fact of the matter is, it's too serious of an issue to let those things get in our way.
Those are great points. Now, we also have this other phase of stuff that you're about, because access to these drugs are often in the home. We know that it's a sad case, but sometimes grandparents and parents keep things accessible, and kids are pretty astute at figuring out what the drugs are that they want to experiment with. So what's the disposal side and the handling side of this?
Yeah, so this is the other big part of our educational efforts, which is medication safety and safe disposal of medications. So we've promoted National Drug Take-Back Day, which it happens biannually in October and April, I want to say, in the spring and fall. And what this is a time when the DEA sponsors sites where people can bring unused medications and dispose of them directly. Many communities around the country also have drug take-back sites. A lot of times they're at police departments or pharmacies where people can drop off medications. But these 2 days a year and these locations are not always convenient for everyone. So one thing that we've done over the years is we've distributed hundreds of thousands of drug disposal pouches that can be used to get rid of medications right in the home. And these things are really cool. It's just it's a plastic bag with some activated charcoal that has some secret sauce that I'm sure is patented by somebody. And you put the medications in there, you add a little water, you shake them, and it deactivates the chemicals in the medications. It's also environmentally safe. So when you're done, you literally you don't even have to unseal that plastic bag. You just throw it in your trash can and send it to the dump. So
how do people get these?
So we distribute them through partners in all of the states that we're working in, and I'd be happy to share some information about how Iowans can get that if I can share that with you after the show.
That'll be great. We'll put it on our website, because I know you're out there, and I know we have drug takebacks all over the state. Yep. And that, it's very important, because that has seriously saved lives. Now, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, I want to ask you about your passion and some of the reasons. There's a story you have to share about why you're so dedicated to this type of work. We'll see you all after the break. You don't want to miss this.
Multiple studies have shown that marijuana can slow both driver reaction and response time, which can be really dangerous. He's here. He's here. Wait. What? I can't drive. Why? My. Oh.
Not all internet is priced this good. Switch to Extreme and go super fast for as low as $19.99 a month for a year. Oh yeah, hook up your home with powerful Wi-Fi, 99.99% reliability, and speeds that are FCC proven to be faster than advertised. Not all internet is priced this good. Switch today and get speeds starting at 100 meg for as low as $19.99 a month for a year. Call 844-EXTREME2 for details.
Welcome back to Surviving Bad. I'm your host, Peter Komendowski, and we're talking with Mark O'Brien with the Prescription Abuse Leadership Initiative. Mark has a strong, life-changing connection to the issues people face in a crisis. Let's hear his story. Mark?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for asking, Peter. This is a story about why this issue is so important to me and this work is so important to me, but it's also a painful story. It starts about 15 years ago. I was in my last semester of law school. I was living with a girlfriend I was very much in love with, and she planned a birthday party for me. And we went out drinking with friends, and I made the really bad decision to try to drive us home after drinking at the bars. I flipped my car on the highway, and Laura died in the accident that I caused. Her parents were just incredibly forgiving, and more so than I could forgive myself for a really long time. But despite their efforts to convince the state not to charge me in her death, I eventually pled guilty to negligent manslaughter, and I went to jail. It was a time where I was just full of grief and shame and sorrow, and frankly, I wish that I could trade places with her. But I also knew that because I had the opportunity to live my life and she didn't, I wanted my life to be one she would be proud of. She was going to be a social worker and help people who had addictions, who were struggling with addictions. And I got to meet a lot of those guys while I was locked up. When I came home, I decided that I was going to dedicate my life to making changes in the systems that in some cases have failed people and not helped them when they needed help. So I've been working in criminal justice, addiction, and mental health for the last 15 years as a policy person with my law degree background, and then as a program manager in Baltimore City. I was the director of opioid overdose prevention, and then I was the executive director of programs for Addiction Policy Forum, where I got to meet a lot of parents who had lost their kids to this issue. And that really reinforced the importance of this vocation for me, because I knew the harm that I had caused to Laura's family, and I saw the pain that they experienced losing their daughter. And I got to know too many parents who have had that same pain because of this issue.
I get the opportunity, and it's so humbling to have parents on the show or when I speak, to meet them in person that have lost children to this terrible crisis. And the sadness is that every single opioid death is preventable. You know, you can't prevent hurricanes. There's so many things that are not preventable, but we have so many people dying, and yet it's 100% preventable. And what impressed me looking at the organization Rally is that you don't sit on a pedestal saying you know everything and come to us. You really gather partners from all parts of the community: business, education, healthcare. What's it like to be out there building partnerships and getting people to recognize that we all have to jump in and do something?
Yeah, so this is the exact reason that I got involved with Rally. When I was working in Baltimore and then with a lot of communities around the country at Addiction Policy Forum, one of the things that I observed in communities that were really starting to make a lot of progress on this was that they really did have everybody at the table. They had parents and community members. They had people who had struggled with this themselves. They had people from the health system, from local government, public health, law enforcement, first responders, all working together. We even in Baltimore, we had our library system had a role in our response to the opioid crisis. And that's the thing that really drew me to Rally, was this idea that there's a position for everybody at the table and there's a role for everybody to play. This is a crisis that affects all of us, you know? And so we all have the opportunity to also be a part of the solution, from within our family and for ourselves, all the way up to the relationships we have and our community. We can all make a difference.
Now, it's a fascinating life that we have now with COVID and the opioid epidemic, but it's also inspirational because you've found so many hopeful people that I want to invest in a better future for their kids. What is the sort of relationship between youth and this problem? Are we engaging youth young enough to get a solid foundation of prevention in them?
This is probably the most important question that can be asked and answered when it comes to this crisis. And just quickly, because you mentioned COVID, I think the last couple of years have made this a lot harder for kids. All of our lives have been so disrupted, but children and young adults and adolescents thrive on structure and routine, and relationships are paramount for them. And all of these things were really disrupted. Okay, so being young is the time in our lives when we are most at risk from these issues. So there are some factors that we can't do anything about when it comes to addiction. There's genetic predisposition. If you have it, the way to know that is, a history of addiction within your family. Because there's not a single gene that we can just point to and say, oh, you have the addiction gene. It's a combination of genetic factors. So if you know that, you want to be more thoughtful about your own substance use, and you want to make sure the young people in your life know that too. Your children know that has been passed down to them, and it's created this special risk for them. But the other thing is, the single greatest protective factor from developing an addiction is postponing ever using substances until after the brain is done developing. It's this really interesting phenomenon where the developing brain, which, I sometimes make this joke where women's brains mature at around age 21 and men's at around age 25, if ever. But the reality is our brains don't finish developing until our 20s. If we use substances in our teens, we actually prime our brain, whether it's tobacco, alcohol, marijuana, substances that some people think are relatively harmless in youth, that can be very dangerous on their own. They also prime the brain for developing an addiction to any other substance later in life. And so when we can interrupt this by having young people start later, if at all, we're doing a really important thing.
Wow, these are powerful points. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll ask Mark to share some final comments, insights, and inspirations. You don't want to miss this. See you all after the break.
Today, more than ever, you need fast, reliable internet. At Mediacom, we want you to know you can count on us. Our fiber-powered 100% gigabit technology network was built for the future. We have enormous capacity and power and 99.99% network reliability. So even though these are uncertain times, we're prepared. And you can be certain we'll keep your world connected.
Surviving Bad, we're talking about the work that is being done to build coalitions throughout the U.S. and Iowa to take on one of America's most prolific killers, opioids. Let's see what insights, advice, and inspiration Mark has to share with us. Mark, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much once again, Peter. There's a lot to do in this work. We still have a long way to go. But I do want to say that I'm very hopeful, because we do have people coming from all walks of life to get involved with this. But what people ask me is, what can I do? Okay, so I want to talk just really quickly about what we can do individually, in our relationships, and in our community. So individually, some things are out of our control, like genetics, and some things are in our control, like when young people start using substances. As adults, things that we can do to help prevent this and to model good behavior for our children are taking care of our bodies, eating well, exercising, getting the right amount of rest, all that self-care stuff that can feel a little indulgent, but actually is incredibly important for our mental health and well-being. Practicing gratitude and cultivating optimism. There are these things that just sometimes seem like maybe a little silly and a little self-indulgent, but actually, again, huge difference. These are big protective factors. And then the other part of this is when there's trouble, reaching out for help. Don't be shy. If you need assistance or if somebody in your life needs assistance, don't be shy. Now, interpersonally, we have to seek out relationships that bring us joy and people who care about us, who care about our well-being. This is really, besides that starting later for children, this is one of the most important things for young people as well. It's relationships with parents are very important, and parents who set good boundaries. But there's actually this other side of this, which is relationships with other adults besides the parents, whether it's coaches, teachers, librarians, mentors, faith leaders. Young people need relationships with other caring adults. It makes a huge difference. In our community, it's about reducing the availability of substances and changing practices and expectation with respect to youth substance use. So we have to set those clear boundaries in our community about what we consider to be acceptable behavior, and let children know and young people know if they start later, they're safer. And this is a big part of getting those substances out of the home, because reducing the availability happens not just on the street, but in our medicine cabinet. So dispose of unused medications. Don't offer medications that are not prescribed. You know, your child hurts their back and you're like, oh, you know what? I had an extra oxycodone from when I hurt my arm. Don't model that behavior. We want to take care of the people we care about, but it sets a bad example, and it's dangerous in and of itself. The last thing I would talk about is we have to invest in the workforce for addiction treatment. Okay. We see this in a lot of industries. We're having a lot of people leave the workforce right now. Burnout is really high in addiction and mental health treatment. So we've got to start supporting these workers to see the positive impact of their work and to take care of themselves so they can keep caring for the ones that we care about.
That's such a powerful message, Mark. Thank you for sharing it. You know, we've known for years from people in recovery that the power of a hug, a smile, and love transcends any drug they might have used. And finding that in children when they're young is so important. And I appreciate your positive attitude about that. And thank you all for joining us today. Check out our website, ahealthyiowa.org, and keep your eye on MediaCom MC22 for our next episode of Surviving Bad, where we explore stories of survival, hope, and inspiration. On MediaCom MC22, your local programming leader.